So it's Black History Month, and since we only really learn the same 5 things over and over, K through 12, I thought it'd be fun to share kind of like the history facts that I've learned by myself. And when I say by myself, I mean like through YouTube and TikTok, mostly. Primarily. We love having to educate ourselves because we can't trust the word of our government. I think it's so funny how I live in the North, aka the states that were not in the Confederacy, aka you waving a Confederate flag around and having Confederate flag bumper stickers doesn't make any sense up here. Because like your heritage, you're Pennsylvania Dutch. The Quakers would be quaking to know what you believe. They're pacifists, aka you don't want to pacifist through anybody else. I digress. I'm from the North. And growing up, we would always make fun of the South because everybody knows that the South has alternate history. So we would make fun of the South like, oh, look at them. They omit history because it doesn't make them look so good. We're morally and educationally superior because we learn all the facts. Now that I'm grown, it's funny to see how many things are omitted from history and how America is so vain and so proud that it really doesn't ever like to admit when it's done bad. Pretty sure the only reason we talk about slavery is because you have to, but there are so many events in history that are overlooked. I know it's Black History Month, but in order to kind of narrow it down and make it more concise, I'm only going to be talking about African American history, and most of them are events that occurred in the United States that we should talk about because they've had like wide repercussions throughout the rest of history. These aren't just isolated incidents, these are incidents that had long-lasting impacts and that we honestly can see today. Also, I will leave everything, every article, every YouTube video that I watched to prepare for this video or that gave me insight. I know they may not be the most credible sources, but I really did cross-check all the facts. That's the reason I've kept a lot of details like more broad, because those are the details that no one can refute. And if you spot that I use lines verbatim from these articles or from these videos, mind your business. This is not for Turnitin. This is not for a grade. Okay. So yeah, the first event is the summer of 1919, aka the race riots of 1919. So basically World War I intensified the Great Migration, or the emigration of African Americans from the rural South to the industrial North, in order to escape the persecution from the Jim Crow laws in the South. Over 500,000 people ended up migrating to northern cities. And so when servicemen returned from the war, they had found that most of their vacant jobs had been filled by these new workers. And it really just created like a lot of job insecurity and a lot of tension surrounding that in these predominantly white northern cities. Another concern was that there were a lot of Black veterans and that they would not so readily resubmit to the subjugation in America literally after fighting a war for them. Because if they were fit for the uniform, why couldn't they be fit for everything else? And this became a threat to Jim Crow laws as well as other forms of racial subordination. Basically, all this mass anxiety and tension turned into mass violence. And it wasn't just from the KKK or other fringe white supremacist groups, it was everyday ordinary white Americans that decided to go out and cause mass violence in the streets. When I was reading about it, it felt like the Lord of the Flies situation, where there was no magic conch, there was no order, there was no one holding them accountable, they just did whatever they wanted. The federal and state governments were hesitant to act, and they let it go on for like 10 months. Again, this was not just in the South. This was in 26 cities all across the US. After the race riots, there were hundreds of people that were left injured, displaced, or dead. They really liked burning things, so they would just burn entire Black neighborhoods to the ground. Black veterans were given firearms for the war, and so in order to counteract all this white hostility, all this white violence, they actually formed like their own sort of militias, and they fought back and protected their neighborhoods. This was the first time that African Americans had fought back against this kind of injustice and violence, and interestingly enough, the generation that survived the race riots of 1919 ended up raising the generation that ushered in the civil rights movement. So I thought that was really cool. Next is the Rosewood Massacre. So in 1923, after claims that a white woman in a nearby town had been assaulted by a black man, a white mob descended upon the town of Rosewood, Florida. The town of Rosewood, Florida was a pretty prosperous town. It was predominantly black with only one white family. Basically, the mob burned the entire town to the ground, save for like the one white guy's house. The survivors ended up fleeing into the swamp, or amazingly enough, the one white family actually helped harbor a lot of survivors. We love an ally. The initial report claimed insufficient evidence for the prosecution, but luckily it was reopened in 1994, and the Florida legislature actually passed the Rosewood Bill, which gave the 9 remaining survivors $150,000 each and created a scholarship fund for their descendants. This is really cool because it was like one in a handful of times that reparations actually happened, and it's an example of what it could look like. Next is the 1985 MOVE bombing in Philadelphia. So basically MOVE was like a back to nature anti-government activist organization based in West Philadelphia. They were labeled extremists and a public nuisance by the media, and the mayor of Philadelphia actually had a lot of pressure to like get them out. So on Mother's Day of that year, police swarmed their row home in order to evict them. They used tear gas and water cannons, and when the residents tried to escape, they shot at them. So you want them out of the house, but then when they leave the house, you shoot at them. So then not having luck with these previous tactics, the police ended up dropping a bomb on the roof of their house. Because obviously a bomb is like the next logical step. This caused an enormous fire that ended up burning down 2 blocks of the neighborhood. Basically, the fire department pulled a Neo in. Let it burn! Whoa! When the MOVE residents tried to flee the fire, they were again met with bullets. And I think it was like 100,000 bullets were used firing into the house. 11 of the members ended up dying that day, including 6 adults and 5 children. And even though everyone agreed that this was an excessive use of force and that the police should have never done this, the only person charged of any crimes from that incident was the one remaining adult survivor. And she's actually alive today. You can actually watch a lot of her interviews on YouTube. This one was interesting to me because I live close to Philly. Close enough. This one was interesting to me because I live like close enough to Philly that you would think we would learn about it in school. But then I asked my outside of Philly crowd friends, you know the kind of people that when you ask where they're from, they just say outside of Philly, even though they're like 45 minutes away from Philly? Pennsylvania things. I asked them and they never heard about it either. So it's really crazy to see how this literally happened 30 years ago and nobody, not even people who live in the city today, know that it happened. And especially with like the rising cases of police brutality and all of the stuff that's happening in the media, this is a really important moment to know about. So there are 2 things that I wanted to include like at the end that aren't events, but I still thought they were interesting. It's the story of the father of modern gynecology, James Marion Sims. Basically, he was like a pioneer, whatever. He did a lot of great things to advance the field of He did a lot of great things to advance the field of female reproductive health, but all of the experiments that led to all those accomplishments were performed on slave women without anesthesia. And there was anesthesia at the time, he just didn't use it. So he would literally perform hysterectomies and he would perform painful operations on women and they would just have to be held down. Basically his discoveries kind of help perpetuate the biological differences between black and white people. That has led to the huge racial healthcare disparity in the United States, which ironically enough, for someone who was so instrumental in female reproductive health, affects maternal mortality the most. This is where you see that black mothers die at 3 to 4 times the normal rate of white moms. Lastly, during World War II, a lot of Jewish people were fleeing Europe and they were coming to America. But the problem was, as any immigrant will tell you, the American immigration process is really lengthy and arduous and they did not have that kind of time. So they would basically have to have sponsorships or someone to vouch for them. They would have to get work visas or certain things like that in order to stay, or else they would be deported and sent to concentration camps. And it's not that the American government didn't know what was going on in Europe. They knew what was going. They knew. They just didn't care because, well, America's also anti-Semitic. Among these Jewish refugees were actually a lot of professors and scholars and people who had gone to really top tier universities, and they actually ended up being hired by historically black colleges who saw it as a great opportunity to have such talented minds teach at their university. It created a really great atmosphere at these universities, and it fostered a lot of racial interconnectedness. So yeah, historically black colleges helped save at least 50 professors' lives, which is amazing. I don't expect to have schools teach every single bit of African American history or black history, but February is 28 days. That's 20 school days for 12 years of our lives. And what do we know? I know Rosa Parks, and that's a lie, it was Claudette. I know Martin Luther King. I'm actually sitting here trying to think of what I know, and it's literally nothing. Let me know of any untold history that you know, that you think is cool. Honestly, I love finding this stuff out. It's like uncovering a secret. So yeah, that's it.